is going on, you guys? It's your boy GNU/Jihadi here, and we're back with episode 74, I believe, of the video game therapy series. It has been a few days, a little over a week actually since I made one of these, but figured I'd get back on the horse. I've been busy writing the software for this new blog that I'm starting, which I did finish. I'll probably make a separate video about that. But pretty much it'll be tweet length, or really 2 or 3x tweet length thoughts in written form, which should be a bit more focused than the thoughts in the abstract I have in the videos like this. But regardless, I feel like it's another medium for me to express myself, and that is, I suppose, one of the tenets of a life well lived that I subscribe to. So for better or worse, I will be writing those. Again, I don't really care if anyone reads them, but that's not really the point. But anyway, I'm working on that instead of doing these videos, so I apologize for the hiatus, but I'm back today, so hopefully I can get back on the horse with no problems. The first topic I have today is about questions. And I've spoken before about, I had people say, oh, there's no such thing as stupid questions. There are stupid questions. And I think what I articulated last time, which I want to echo, I still agree with this. I haven't really pivoted on this this belief yet, is that simple questions are not inherently stupid. In fact, the simple, obvious questions are sometimes the most profound. Like a really very simple question is what is the meaning of life? Which is, again, one of the more profound questions. Is God real? These are very simple, kind of obvious, dumb. Oh, a child would ask this question, but it's they're also very profound. That doesn't mean that all simple questions are profound. A lot of them are stupid. But that also I just want to disassociate complex questions from being useful and simple ones from being dumb. Dumb questions are independent of their simplicity. So I just want to make that point. But I feel like dumb questions are ones that there's probably many different categories I could create for what makes a question dumb. But one of which is questions that immediately just prompt more questions. I feel like these are just inherently very stupid. So one, it's, I guess, in the realm of American politics, if you follow that, which I don't, but I mean, it's a question that comes up a lot. It's like, oh, are you a liberal or conservative or a Democrat, Republican? And really the first thing that comes to mind from that is, okay, well, what do those descriptors really mean? And it's not like, in a very general sense, you might know, if you live in a certain part of the country, you might have a good understanding of what those things mean. But ultimately, because those terms are so nuanced and they're so, you could spend hours discussing what it even means to be liberal in the first place, much less label yourself as one. And I think as an idea, it's stupid to label people as even just buckets of ideas, oh, I'm a socialist, or I'm a liberal, or I'm a whatever. And instead, bucket the ideas themselves. So you could say that socialism, or again, you could plug and play whatever terms you want here. Socialism is a list or an inherent category of ideas. And then you could hold ideas or beliefs that fall into those buckets. But saying that you are a socialist versus you hold ideas, or most of your ideas are consistent with socialism, I think are very, very different things. Because then I just think it's really stupid to put yourself into one of those labels instead of putting your ideas themselves into the label. Because then ultimately it's for one, it reduces it's not personal anymore. If you just say that you hold an idea that is consistent with conservative values, doesn't make you a conservative. So it's not as bad if somebody is ragging on conservatives or the conservative ideas. And I even think bucketing them, it's talking about conservatives or liberals, is part of the issue, instead of talking about conservative and liberal ideas. Because I think, again, those should be separate. And the moment they're personal, everyone's going to want to defend their right. And then it becomes more about defending, it's the person themselves who feels insulted versus the actual idea. Because the ideas themselves should be fine. You should change, and you can move them around, and it's okay. It's okay if you change your mind. There shouldn't be any shame in that. But the moment it's an identity of sorts, then it becomes an issue. So maybe it's a problem that we've marketed these ideas as these personal identities when they really just should just be buckets of ideas that we just toss ourselves into. So bucket ideas or arguments, all you'd like, I think that's perfectly fine. Categorically, it makes a lot of sense and it's easier for us to think about them. But like bucketing humans is such a stupid thing. Such a stupid thing. But anyway, back to the simple questions. So, like a question like, oh, are you liberal or conservative? Again, I would say is a really dumb question because, or if you answer it one way or the other, I think that's a dumb answer to a dumb question, which doesn't excuse the dumb answer, but it's still a dumb question. Because it immediately prompts more questions. What is like, there's no established kind of universal understanding of what any of these terms mean anyway. It's like if you ask people in California what a conservative is and versus people in South Carolina, you're probably going to get wildly different answers for that. And then you're ultimately going to be more confused about what those terms even mean, much less whether or not you fall into those buckets. So I think it ends up being a really fruitless question. So it's really just a really, really dumb question. So I don't know. And my other thought on questions, again, assuming that there are dumb questions, I wonder if people had, again, maybe in like this pre-technology area or an era where you weren't as able to entertain yourself so trivially. And it just means it's just so easy for us to be entertained from life until death now. And I don't know that that's something that we should accept wholeheartedly and quickly and rapidly, only because it's already kind of taking a toll psychologically. Again, there's the whole the pain of the mind versus pain of the body argument that I made last time, or one of the last times. I'm not sure which episode that was. But I just think perhaps in an age where it was more difficult to distract yourself, perhaps there was more ruminating. People spent more time thinking about life and whether or not, and just, I guess, the questions that I kind of ask myself in these videos. And I wonder how true that thought is, of that people spent more time ruminating. And I don't really know what the impact of that is. And I would obviously be on the side that I think rumination and kind of self-discovery and really just self-exploration in some sense, because sometimes it's not even about discovering things about yourself. It's more or less just kind of exploring anything, really. It doesn't have to be about you anyway. It could just be about the world. I think that's, in a lot of ways, they're two sides of the same coin. But I obviously see great value in that. And I don't mean economic value. It's not something you can, monetize or sell as some course or something. I just think in general, it makes for more well-rounded, interested humans, or humans that are just better objectionally, or just have thought more deeply about things versus just this very, we're less animals in that sense. I think that's one thing that makes us so unique and interesting, is our ability to do that. And now we seem to be acting more like animals than we could be if we were to allow ourselves more time to think deeply and ruminate about things, which is one of our superpowers as humans. But why don't we do that? I don't know. And so I don't know if we did it more often in an earlier age, or a prior age, or an era, or whatever, or not, or maybe I'm just romanticizing something that a time I wasn't around for. But I'd like to believe if there was nothing to do but, I guess, play poker if your friends were around, or I guess get drunk, or some people did, you'd spend more time thinking about the mysteries and things of life. And I guess since less things were solved and there was less scientific information, people wondered about things that were, I guess, answerable in many ways. And they wondered about questions like, what did this apple fall? It's like, well, now we can make very, very easy answers to those. And people, I guess, may mistake that for us being able to answer anything trivially. So there's no point in thinking about even those simple questions, right? Is God real? What's the meaning of life? Why am I here? That kind of thing, which I still find great value in. But anyway, I guess the other thing I wanted to, that's related to questions, it's, I guess, a little bit different. Good questions, whether they're simple or convoluted, doesn't, not all good questions are simple. Certainly not. I think it's trivially true, but I think really good questions never have simple answers. And maybe science just tries to distill good questions with simple answers, like, oh, why does a tree fall? Oh, gravity. Okay, great. Like that's a somewhat simple answer. Not really simple, how they derived it, but it's simple now that we have accepted it and whatnot. But I think really good questions never have simple answers. And I suppose simple questions don't always really have good answers. And I mean by good answer, I just mean something that is thorough, like a simple question of, even are you liberal or conservative? It's a simple question, but the answer is terrible because it's a bad question. Or what is the meaning of life is a simple question, but the answer isn't really good because it's, or the answer isn't simple because it's very, it's a difficult question, right? Despite it being straightforward, it just doesn't have a good answer. So I'm not sure. Maybe I think there's a strange, maybe like inverse or interesting relationship between, I'll say like good and bad is hard to use in this context because again, there are questions that I could say are bad, but maybe in some contexts aren't that bad. Like what is your name is like, is a fair question. And like if you're talking to somebody, that's I'm not saying it's a bad question, but in terms of questions that are worth ruminating about, I wouldn't say that what is your name is like this worthwhile expenditure of all your time. Like it's not a deep philosophical question. You took a name and accepted it and now that's your name. Like we're not, so it's not like it's a bad question. I don't mean to call those questions bad, but they're certainly not, I guess not good in this sense. Maybe like profound versus straightforward might be a better framing of the two types of questions I'm speaking about. But I think there's some inverse relationship between the complexity of the answer to either profound or straightforward questions. Which again, simple and straightforward, I don't consider the same vein. I think there are differences there, but anyway, it's just interesting. Questions themselves fascinate me in some sense, which is strange because I think questions are generally the destination of fascination, meaning that you are interested in something, you start asking questions, but a lot of times even the questions themselves are interesting, and they can lead to, I guess, more questions, I suppose, which, I don't know, is one purpose of one's existence is to be a useful generator of interesting questions. But anyway, I guess while other people are fascinated by answers to things, I think being fascinated by questions isn't all that bad either. And I don't mean to make that my identity. I just think more so than usual, I think questions themselves are very interesting. And that's a lot of times it's not even important what the answer is. I think just asking the right question. I think Einstein even talked about in the sense, this is the sense of like actual problem solving, which is I guess useful question answering and question asking, is that he would spend most of his time thinking about the right question. And the answer, once you ask the right question, is quite simple, but the correct question is often the most difficult thing to arrive at, which I think is an interesting take, and is perhaps why I like searching and digging through questions versus like thinking about answers more than anything. So I don't know, this whole like meta this meta analysis and thinking on questions is a interesting, albeit difficult path to ruminate on. But I'll move on to something else. But anyway, maybe I'll come back to that. So here's something else that I think is an interesting, it's a very, very deep rabbit hole. So I'm just going to be skimming the surface here. But on the topic of sovereignty, which sovereignty I disassociate a little bit from, or quite a lot actually, from a topic like freedom or independence. I think freedom and independence have their social connotation that kind of poisons the idea of sovereignty. And sovereignty, I suppose, as one easy way to define it, is just self-governance. And I guess autonomy is another way of thinking about it, but it's not. It kind of means its own thing. Like I think there are words that we always reason by analogy when it comes to defining words, but sometimes that isn't good because words inherently have their own nuances. But when we say that, oh, sovereignty is just like autonomy, we can conflate those meanings, and ultimately we have 10 words that all mean one word to you, whereas these 10 words each have their own meaning, but now to you everything is just like one word, right? But anyway, I'll move on. Either way, sovereignty is an interesting topic to me, and I think sovereignty is one thing that, at least for me, I'm not going to say for all humans, but it's something that I desire in my affairs, to put it one way. And I would hope, and I would argue that for many people also appreciate their sovereignties. This is, and I've categorized this into, I guess, at a very high level, a few different buckets, I suppose. One of which is like this digital sovereignty in the digital age. There's, I suppose, financial sovereignty, which again, so these are kind of related. They're not entirely independent. Then you have like physical sovereignty, like again, governance over your body and your location, and like where you go and what you do, like that kind of sovereignty. As well as like your social sovereignty, again, who you interact with and what your, I don't know what your, I guess the more interactive other human parts of your sovereignty. So there's different buckets there, and I wonder, begin thinking about what the direction of the world and its impacts on these different types of sovereignty, and which ones are the most, I guess, important now. I think like financial sovereignty, you could very much draw a correlation between, I don't know, economic systems, income, I guess the ability to buy a house and stuff. And again, buying the house or getting your own real estate is a huge part of the physical sovereignty part. So again, these are all very related, but I wonder, and I suppose I would argue, and this is where I'm going with this, is that the digital sovereignty is one that seems to be most threatened now. I think at one point, and I guess I'm mostly speaking about internet technology here, just because that's just the most pervasive. But I suppose even just with hardware in general, especially like the sovereignty of said hardware, is under attack. And I would argue at a scale and a pace, maybe not actually, yeah, a scale and a pace that is non-comparable to social, physical, and financial sovereignty, which again, they're all very, very connected. But I would argue that the loss of digital sovereignty would be a huge blow to the financial, physical, and social sovereignties of individuals. So that's kind of what my main thesis here behind this whole talk, or this whole argument, I suppose, is that these different types of freedoms or sovereignties or whatever you want to call them. Again, I don't like to use the word freedom in this sense, only because it just makes me think of hot dogs and rednecks and beers, which isn't really freedom, and it's not necessarily like that's one that could be freedom, but freedom could also be like, you know, I choose to be locked up into a radiator, chained to a radiator in my basement or something. That's also like, you're free to do that too, I suppose. Anyway, but I don't know, I view digital sovereignty under the most threat. And ironically, it's also one that I think is the easiest to escape from. Like, you can't really achieve social or physical sovereignty without significant financial sovereignty. And you can't really achieve financial sovereignty without a shit ton of money. Which I suppose, again, maybe you could rope together financial and social. I don't want to draw strict lines around these buckets, and I'm sure there's other, maybe like, you know, facets or really just larger categories of sovereignty that exist. But I suppose these are just ones I thought of off the top of my head. But I can argue that I think that digital is the most under threat and the easiest to achieve, like digital sovereignty. Especially, at least with the cost of things now. I suppose if the cost of computers and hard drives and everything quadruples, which I don't really see that happening, or not even quadruples, that would still be more attainable than, you know, financial sovereignty. I think for these other types of sovereignty, they're very much under threat, but they're kind of harder to achieve than digital sovereignty. So I don't know. I just think it's a very interesting concept of, I suppose, buying your freedom or obtaining your freedom in some sense. And as someone who, again, I feel shackled in a lot of ways in the modern conception of society and working and money and all this stuff, and finding ways to feel free is what I aspire to do in the short term, at least, to buy my ability even to think openly and freely. Because, you know, I suppose we all think that, it's you can think about whatever you want. Well, I mean, again, this is one maybe kind of backwards or weird way of framing like a job, but a job is really, in a lot of ways, they're paying you to think about something for a certain, like they're paying for your time to think about something. Maybe you're just thinking about moving boxes, or you have to think about what this person just told you to do. Or in many cases, maybe if you're, a tech worker, engineer or something, they're telling you, they're bribing you to think about this specific, business use case or whatever. Which again, if you enjoy ruminating on like niche technical problems and like building UIs or whatever, then it may not feel like a bribe, because of course maybe you're going to think about that anyway. And I spend time thinking about things that again could be economically valuable anyway, but I wouldn't want to do so under the, like, there's a reason I don't put a paywall up for people to watch me videos, is because I think that my ruminations should be freely distributed. It's not there's something inhumane about just charging people for stuff that should, for ideas and things that should be free, especially when the goal the goal for humanity shouldn't be to make as much money as possible, because money doesn't really mean anything out of that sense. The goal should be to better ourselves and I guess our existence, which doesn't happen by everyone putting up paywalls for everything. So that's kind of why I don't do that. So I'm not sure. It's a very, very interesting idea. And I get it. This is my other haiku I have on here. Is I just call it money. It's related to this. It just says money advice, and I don't mean advice. It's like money as the adjective. Like, oh, this is money advice. I mean advice for money. There seems to be a growing trend, and at least maybe this is upon like these pseudo entrepreneurs that they speak about. Oh, well, like get good at something and then like sell it. Get good at something and then sell it. Just put it behind this paywall, which is fine. But then you're really like what you're incentivizing. I feel like the behavior itself doesn't seem good. Like, in order for it to be valuable, I have to charge for it, because like inherently things that you give out for free are not seen as valuable. And again, I don't think that they are. I try to dissociate as much economic value from my work, from anything really, as possible, because I think we've lost the plot on what is economically valuable and what is actually valuable. And just because something is worth $8 million on paper does not mean it has any, whatever that even means, has anywhere near that amount of worth actually, right? It's not worth $8 million just because it's worth $8 million. Just because someone would pay for it. And I suppose the economics will always say, oh, well, someone would pay that much for it, then it's worth that much, which I don't necessarily agree with. But I think it's especially, I don't even know what the right word is. Rude even could be a very blunt word to use, to only give advice under the pretense that your advice is worth money and that someone should pay for it. It's just something just feels wrong about that. And especially it always just incentivizes people to only think about things that they could charge for, right? Because then you're not. I mean, even the many discoveries I think that we've made as humans aren't ones that people have like thought about. Oh, what's like a valuable piece of monetary advice I can think of? I'm sure Einstein wasn't considering the monetary value of his theory of relativity when he proposed it. He was just thinking about something that was interesting to him. And yeah, it just so happened that it was worth a bunch of money, but you can't discount things that are worth money just because they're like, that aren't worth money just because no one would pay for them. And so I don't know, it kind of applies more broadly. So in order for you to you have to think about things that are worth money or give advice, or even if you do think it, like let's say someone thinks that my videos are worth paying for. Again, perhaps maybe they are, maybe I believe that they should be. But then the fact is I'd have to, I'm supposed to charge for them. It just doesn't seem, it seems wrong. And again, I realize if you're viewing this from an economic professor's point of view or a textbook or something, then it makes sense. But in many ways, I don't think we should incentivize that behavior. And maybe it's a whole meta conversation on incentives that is really what is driving me away from this whole point, is that I think our modern incentive structure, like what is incentivizing us to do anything, incentivizing you to wake up in the morning to get a job, to get coffee, like the ads incentivizing you this certain behavior, platforms incentivizing certain thoughts and behavior, like the whole incentives, like the incentives that we entertain daily, I just think are just so perverse and anti-human and anti-flourishing that I almost want to reject incentives outright, as a concept. I almost want to be And then maybe that's what the whole idea of sovereignty is, in the sense, is freeing myself from these perverse incentives. And again, maybe at one point, maybe a lot of these incentives are benign. Maybe it's not, the worst thing in the world for you to get, I don't know, an acne foot cream ad if you have acne on your foot or something. But ultimately, like, I feel like there's so much perverting that goes on and again, I'm not using the word perverting sexually here. I'm using it as like a mutation, a bad mutation. I almost use perverse to define itself. A bad mutation on what is otherwise natural consequences or natural behavior, or natural consequences of behavior or thinking. And again, I don't mean to say that like all advertisements are. I mean, I guess I kind of think that all advertisements are mostly pretty bad, because I don't think there should be any. But even in things that aren't inherently advertisements, again, like advice that you should pay money for, things that are worth value, like products that are worth value, we have to like make sure that there's money involved or something. And I get it. I don't conceptually hate that this medium of exchange that money represents, but in many ways it's just so far away. We've lost the plot, I think. And maybe that's why I have such strong opinions on stuff like this. But I'm not sure. It's interesting, but I suppose I think that we should be as free from incentives. I think the quote I like around this, I guess, incentives and creativity, and no one would harp on even the economic value of creativity, but creativity is like freedom is creativity, right? If you don't, people aren't creative when you put a gun to their head, right? People are creative when they're free, right? Against, again, the great people who've come to the greatest conclusions weren't people that were locked up and chained and forced to think about things. They're ones that were free and had a lot of sovereignty in their daily musings and in their life. And of course, we have to wait for people to prove that they're worthy in order for them to give them sovereignty, instead of giving them sovereignty and then allowing them to flourish. Instead, you have to, you had to work another job to make money, to buy yourself enough time and other stuff to be able to ruminate freely. So we're, like, by default, we're not free in any sense of the word. We have to earn that freedom. Which, again, I'm not saying we shouldn't have to work for anything. Everything should be free, but shouldn't, I guess, a goal of mankind be for us to free up as much of human time and to reduce the amount of time we have to spend doing dumb shit? Because it's not even like, it'd be one thing if I was arguing against, like, growing crops. Like, if everyone spent all their time growing crops and feeding people, or like caring for children, I have no problem with that, right? I think those are fine. Those are like self-sustaining like activities that we need to do. But like now, instead, we're sacrificing our time to like do the dumbest shit ever. Again, like product managers and people that do literally nothing. This is what humans have done. is we're literally wasting our time in order for us to earn some semblance of, like, we have to earn our autonomy, whereas we could just give people autonomy, or sovereignty. I suppose autonomy is, again, a different word to use there. Unless they've proven to us that they're worthy of their sovereignty. It just seems strange, especially if we can afford it. And I think, I guess, in terms of resources, we can. Most people eat too much and have too much shit to buy. And the fact that advertising exists kind of proves my point there, that there's inherently too much crap for us to do. So we have to invent and force people to buy stuff that they don't want, and then work harder for stuff that they also don't want, at a job they hate and they don't are interested about. And again, I'm envious of people that fit neatly into a category where they enjoy ruminating about problems with I don't know, technical back end of Facebook or something, and they can get paid to do that. That's wonderful. But I don't think, again, there are infinitely more jobs that pay nothing and don't exist, and that you will never get any money for, because no one finds it economically valuable, than ones that are. So I think, like, the whole answer to, like, oh, just find a job that you like and do that instead, you dipshit. But it's like, well, these jobs don't, these quote unquote jobs, again, that the whole idea, it doesn't exist, and because there's no money involved, and it's like, I have to do something that is, quote unquote valuable in terms of the economy, in order for me to get paid to do it, which is a job, in order for me to do things that I would want to do, or that I would find valuable. Again, again, the whole incentive, the whole idea around this incentives of money and jobs and stuff, I think is just wrong. And it's not like I'm not arguing against no one growing food or caring for children. I think that we're instead spending time doing stuff that's stupid, like optimizing click rates for ads that are, for products that no one wants to buy, or you're setting up drop shipping companies or something. This should not be this should not be what human hours are spent doing. I feel like we have these wonderful gifts, that whomever, the creator, God, whoever has bestowed upon us, and we're wasting it doing what? Managing accounts for an advertising firm. This is insane. What the hell's wrong with us? So I don't know. That's kind of my just more cynical argument on the whole thing. But I suppose I don't really have a choice. So again, one thing is that you could, I guess, the other problem you have to battle with here, I suppose, is, yes, I can't do anything about it, and I could complain endlessly, and that's fine. I could live my whole life, bitter about the whole thing, or I can just, I guess, slowly boil myself into, like, saying, oh, it's not that bad, or not caring, or just accepting it, or whatever. Which again, a certain amount of it I'm hesitant on doing, right? And I have no doubt that through enough time and enough, I use indoctrination here pretty loosely, but with enough indoctrination, surrounding myself with people that think the same, I'm certain that I could eventually be someone who go, oh, it's not that bad, it's kind of, it's all right, I guess, actually, it's actually kind of brilliant, and I could come around and I could eventually be okay with all of it. But at a certain point I ask, do I really want to do that? How much of this, and how much, and I know that I could change to accept things that I currently find abhorrent. But I suppose others would have to do the same, or have done the same, and will do the same. But how much of that, how much are we fighting really the nature of ourselves? And I suppose maybe I fall in more of a, I don't know if naturalist is the right word, but I believe there is some natural order to the things that humans should be doing and spend their time doing, that I think we have abstracted to a detail that is problematic, I suppose. And again, maybe a lot of the historically great thinkers and things were, a lot of them kind of repeated this axiom of, living in accordance with nature, and there's some natural being, that they weren't. I would be hesitant to say that a lot of them were like pro cybernetics and these interplanetary people. And I don't mean the chief entrepreneurs or tech people of the day. I mean, even just like the great scientific and philosophical thinkers weren't all, foot on the gas. A lot of them appreciated and enjoyed nature. Many of them were avid walkers and readers of arts and literature. They were multidimensional people. And I'm not using that to justify my opinion on this. I'm just saying I'm not in a silo here thinking that there's some natural order or natural inclination of humans to obey a certain doctrine. And even biologically, there are many undeniable natural impulses and instincts that we have. To a certain extent, I think should be left alone, only because we may not understand it, right? I think if we pretend like we understand it too much and fuck with it, we could do a lot more damage than we could if we had just respected it. It's like we could try to divert hurricanes or something, but at a certain point, do we really want to be fucking with nature to that level? It's like, I don't know that we want to be doing that, right? Because at a certain point, it's like even, I guess, the creation of the atomic bomb would even be one in this category. And again, that's kind of tangential. It's not really something about nature at that point. It's more about, hard caps on science. But now, whether we like it or not, we have a weapon capable of annihilating this entire planet into oblivion. And I'm not sure how many people it takes for that to happen. Again, I could say one, but I think one is being a little bit ridiculous. I don't think it's exactly one person. I don't think even if the president wanted to nuke Russia or something, or China, I don't think that they could do that. Maybe they could. I don't know anything about politics enough to know. But I would hope that there's, perhaps maybe it takes a dozen or 20 people on the planet to decide that we want to blow the whole thing up, which seems a little strange, right? I think if many people were asked, verbatim, do you think that these things should exist? Now, I'm not saying that, oh, well, if we don't get it, then China's going to get it. It's like, well, okay, then, but even though, if we had the technology to, control tsunamis and hurricanes, would we want that? you know, because now everyone has them. Now China could do it. Now Russia. Now everyone has the technology to control hurricanes and tsunamis. And at any point, you know, a group of humans could decide that using any one of these different factors to kill everybody or do something horrible. Because it's easier to destroy than it is to build. So it really only takes, you know, a couple of morons, or in some cases, just one idiot who's compelling enough to convince everybody that they're crazy. So even like something like, I would say, people like chips in the brain, like the whole Neuralink chip thing. Like, we could do that, yes. And if we all had chips in our brain, but would we want that? Now we have the power for one person to brainwash, you know, 8 billion people at once, or show ads to everybody at once. You know, everyone's got to stop and their eyes roll back in their head as they're watching a McDonald's ad, you know, 8 in the morning or something like that. Or this universal alarm clock, everyone gets up at 8. I mean, what the fuck are we doing? At a certain point, how much should we just not fuck with nature? It seems just wrong. I don't know. And again, maybe this is my internal biology speaking. I haven't ascended to this level of sciencey genius yet to understand how weak our stupid little flimsy bodies are. But I have no problem with my little flimsy weak body. You know, in the grand scheme of things, that's okay that a gorilla can kill me if it wants to, and if I'm fucking around with it. You know, I think that says more about me than it does the gorilla if I'm fucking with it. So I don't know. It's a very interesting concept of I guess how natural should we be? You know, how natural are we? I suppose one is many people would say that we're so malleable that we can adapt to these. You know, we can adapt to a world of algorithms and AI and all this other stuff. So you know, one question would be how malleable are we to these things? And the second is how malleable should we want to be? Right? Is it ideal that we can conform to such an extent that everything ends up being okay? Like if I enjoyed and relished this, if I loved like being a slave, for example, would that justify something like slavery, right? If you were capable of making slavery this happy, exciting thing, you know, whether it be through drugs or technology or whatever, should you do that? It's like, probably not, because I imagine that we're not really perfectionists, us humans, if you haven't noticed. We're not perfectionists in any sense of the word. We designed very imperfect language. Even mathematics in a lot of ways can be recursive in its definitions, right? Mathematics, a lot of them, you know, we have this perfect equation that's only perfect if you accept the perfect equation. It's like, okay, well then, it defines itself in some way. So if you don't accept the base definition, then you can't really accept any of it, which again, you would not choose to do, I suppose. But we're very, very imperfect in general. So again, would we want this? I don't know. It's a difficult thing for me to just wholeheartedly endorse a lot of advancements, and I'll put advancements in quotes there, or italices, you know, to, I guess, kind of emphasize that point. But anyway, let's see. Personal responsibility. This is another interesting, hang on, take a drink here. So personal responsibility is another interesting topic. I suppose this also is kind of a spectrum of sorts on where people fall. Some people think that your problems are, I guess, never yours, or your problems are always yours, and there's everywhere in between. So I guess, I don't know, my prompt is, what do I think about this? You know, I think some people historically, I suppose, like Teddy Roosevelt comes to mind in this, but he was very much hidden, like his personal problems. He wasn't very outward about all of it. Like there's a lot of hardship in his life. I think his wife and his mom like died on the same day, like a year after his dad died. Like just things that are bad. And these could pale in comparison to some child suffering somewhere, but just as an example, okay, somebody suffering through horrible things in their life, perhaps through no fault of their own. You know, some kid I get cancer tomorrow, and all of a sudden I have a week to live. You know, at what point, you know, is there? Maybe it's not even a point, but how much should we bear problems ourselves, and to leave them, leave others out of our problems, I suppose, to put it bluntly. And I don't know, I generally fall more on the you should try to bear your problems as much as you can. I don't think it's not, and I guess maybe it's just that I think that most people don't care about other people's shit. Most people just care about themselves. There's this very strong theory of like I guess, self-importance, or just even maybe it's a biological impulse, but really we care about ourselves. Like our self-interest is paramount, I suppose, within human nature. So making your problems other humans' problems is kind of there's generally a losing game, and I don't know what the percentage of net winners versus losers, or if there's meaning that, like, is there more people that create problems for other people, or more people that, excuse me, that solve their problems and help other people with their problems. I don't know. I mean, I guess with the amount of problems in the world, in some sense, exponentially increasing, you could argue that there are, maybe not exponentially, but increasing in general, at some level, maybe not, that people are quick to make their problems known, and maybe not even just known, but to create other people's problems from your problems, to kind of fester this survival of your problems, almost as like a biological entity. Like if you think of problems as like this thing that needs to reproduce, you need to reproduce your problems amongst others, and I think there's a certain elegance, I guess, to put it that way, of dealing with problems yourself and having them be self-contained entirely. And there's I don't know, it's an appealing tenet to live through you solving your own problems and not creating more problems for other people. Again, I use Teddy Roosevelt as an example because he's an interesting character that did this, but he was historically, but never showed his problems outward. And I think that's good. And I generally maybe fall on that more on that end than others, but perhaps it also depends on how much suffering you're able to handle relative to other humans. I would guess that there are people that have a higher tolerance for problems than others. And is it the responsibility of those higher tolerance people to bear problems of lower tolerance people? Or at what point do people take advantage of that? And they just, even if they are, maybe inherently a high tolerance person for problems, they just, pretend like it's just so they can help people. And maybe it's just, that's like the, social engineering douchebag in there that who's, can, just because you could steal a bunch of money from your grandma doesn't mean you obviously shouldn't, but, I suppose some people do, right? So I don't, there's a certain lack of control you have over stuff like that. But, I don't know, the paradigm of whose problems are whose problems, because again, you could always find an excuse or a scapegoat for your problems. And there's undeniably always somebody else at play. Like problems that you created are almost never entirely they're not all your fault always. Like you could always just blame, at a blanket level, like the economy for having, not making any money, or society for not paying artists or something like that. You could always blame something else. But at what point do you say, well, you just, whether or not you want to, I suppose, except that you have to deal with problems anyway. And some would go out an axiom of saying that you shouldn't ever make your problems other people's problems, which I guess is one attitude. But I think that also doesn't mean to say that you can't speak about problems outside of your purview. So, like, for example, if you say, well, the economy sucks, whatever, the attitude of, oh, well, just you have to do it anyway, doesn't mean that you should ignore now, like, oh, there's no problems in the economy now because it's just I have to deal with it myself kind of thinking. Like, you should still identify and even to some level complain about problems in the economy or whatever, despite having no impact or not being able to do anything about it. But then also trying to address those problems, again, through whatever limited means you have. I suppose the important thing might be to scope out and understand what problems you can do things about. And the reason maybe I don't like people bitching about problems that they have no control over is that they have no control over them, and it's not up to them to do anything about it. So what problems are they be able to do things about? So maybe it's their own problems. Maybe they could fix their own health or something, or get better habits or something, or even just at a larger level for themselves. What could they do beyond themselves that they have the power to do? Like if you had the power to change the economy, or if you were the Fed or something, then maybe like these economic problems people bitch about are your problem and you could fix them. So you should. So I suppose maybe people there's a misconception among what problems you actually could do anything about, and what problems what problems are yours just to bear anyway. So I don't know. It's very, there's perhaps a whole mathematical argument, even just semantics around problems and what counts as problems, and what you can do about them. Because I do think that bitching about problems that are of no, they're outside of your purview are superfluous. But I also think that there are perhaps universal abstract problems that are very much worth wrestling with, even if there's nothing you can do about them. So like, for example, an abstract question like what is the meaning of life is inherently a problem that you would have no control over, and no, I suppose you do have control over the meaning of your life. I suppose I can't say that, but even so, you will never be able to answer that question, I guess, concretely, I suppose, unless you can delude yourself into some mode of thinking or some solution. But I still think that problems like in that sense are effective and useful to ruminate about. And so maybe people treat, economic and social issues in that same light, where they think, well, they know they have nothing to do with, some geopolitical issue across the country or across the world even. But they see them as valuable problems for them to ruminate on, which maybe that's the part I would question. I think maybe a lot of modern, modern politics isn't about philosophy, hardly ever. It's all about geopolitical economy and all this other shit that you truly have no control over. But again, if it were about philosophy, maybe, I think you do have control over your own philosophy of things and your own thinking. So that's why I would view those problems more in a brighter light than something that you, honest to God, have no control over and are just wasting your time thinking about or bitching about. I don't know. Anyway, yeah, let's see. I suppose that speaking more about, this is related to the topics I've spoke about today, so I'll include it in this talk. But many of the, and I'll make a vague reference to these great thinkers, but I'm namely speaking, I suppose, in recent mind of thinkers like Nietzsche and Einstein both, and many others. I'm not going to enumerate them because it'd be ad nauseum. A lot of them spoke ad nauseum about the importance of the individual, and not in the individual in sense as like be selfish. It just means like the individuality, like free individuality and like free speech, and the ability to think and do sovereignly, I suppose, to use the word that is thematic of today's episode. And Nietzsche even was quoted saying that or I think maybe again, I'm kind of being I'm pretty sure he quoted this, was that individuality is an existential threat to the human race, meaning that people like conformity is essentially, or the loss of individuality through conformity is an existential threat to the human race. Because I think, and I would agree with that in a lot of ways. And it's not that I promote individuals making these whack off statements or going on ridiculous things. That doesn't mean I have to endorse every individual's dumb ideas. Even my own, I put in that category. But I think the freedom to have an individual's ideas that perhaps literally no one else agrees with, I think is indeed very useful and practical to have, even in a larger sense. And I don't mean a sense that we shouldn't have anybody to conform, because if there's no one to conform, there's no unity. So perhaps there's value in conformity too. But I think there's perhaps conformists, and I'll use that word very loosely. Conformists view individuals as a threat, and individuals view conformity as a threat, but they ultimately can't coexist in absolutes. So it's important that there's both conformity and individuality. And perhaps I see individuality under greater threat than conformity by nature, because naturally there are more conformists than individuals. So your conformists are going to be are fighting against that and trying to squash out semblance of individuality, because they think that's the existential threat is people being different. This person's so different, he wants to, maybe he's different enough to think he wants to kill everybody. Which again is perhaps a dangerous individual ideology. But I think the existence of individual ideologies on the singular, even just in small groups or on the singular, is paramount to the even just the biological survival of humanity. We wouldn't have gotten to where we are today without this free spirit of individuality, and sovereignty is a necessary prerequisite for individuality. You can't be, if I were chained to the same radiator as everyone else, eating the same food, watching the same thing, it is incredibly difficult to think differently and to come up with any new ideas, whether they're good or bad ideas, right? And just because we can, there's the existence of a horrible thing amongst us doesn't excuse the prevalence of restriction, I suppose. And so I guess it comes back to the whole, like, if you would sacrifice an ounce of freedom for an ounce of security, you deserve neither security nor freedom, which is, I think that's a Ben Franklin quote or FDR quote or something like that. I'm not sure. Or probably Ted Roosevelt quote. I don't know. Either way, I don't know. This whole individuality versus conformity battle, I think, is a very, very interesting one. But I would agree with both Einstein and Nietzsche, which pretty easy company to agree with, I suppose. It'd be pretty stupid if I was disagreeing with them, but maybe I'll find things I disagree with on them and talk about those at length. But in general, I think the individuality is constantly under threat by, again, by nature, by people that are by conformists, because they view these individual bad actors as the problem, when individuality isn't the issue. Perhaps it's the individual that is the issue. It's not this freedom that is, giving people freedom to think freely is the issue. That's not the problem. And again, I think it's difficult to conceptualize that if you don't have this almost absolute sense of freedom, because you feel like, oh, well, you're only free to think about things in this okay range of freedom. I think the whole point of it is that there cannot be a restriction on what is okay, because that inherently is that's what the problem is. So you can't say, well, it's okay to think freely as long as you think freely within these bounds. It's like, no, it has to be. And I realize that will result in Machiavellis and Hitlers and bad people to exist. But ultimately, none of that means that none of us exist, and we all die. And I think that's what the existential threat of the loss of individuality is. And I don't think you can't put bounds on individuality and freedom or sovereignty in some sense, because again, freedom, I think, is kind of a bastardized word. But anyway, maybe I'll go in more depth next time, but very, very interesting conceptual idea of this everlasting battle between conformity and individuality. But anyway, I'll pinch it off there. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.